The deadly blast, the mining colony, was supposed to be quiet that night. The stars above the barren planet burned cold and distant, and only the low hum of the machines filled the air. Ethan, a human engineer, had been sent to check on the generators. It was routine work, nothing dangerous. At least that was what he thought. As he walked along the narrow path between storage units, he noticed something strange. The ground shook lightly, almost like a whisper beneath his boots. He frowned and placed a hand against the wall of the storage bay. The vibration grew stronger. His instinct screamed that something was wrong. Then it happened. A blinding light burst from the northern section of the colony. The explosion tore through the air like a beast's roar, shattering metal and stone. Ethan was thrown back, the sound so loud it rattled his bones. The heat from the blast licked across his skin even from a distance. For a moment his mind went blank and all he could hear was ringing. Through the smoke and chaos, Ethan's eyes caught a small figure. A child, no, not human. Her skin shimmered faintly blue under the glow of the fires, her wide silver eyes frozen in terror. An alien girl, maybe 10 years old, stood trapped near the edge of the collapsing platform. Pieces of burning debris rained down around her. She could not move. Fear rooted her to the ground. Ethan didn't think. He didn't calculate. He just ran. The ground shook as another explosion rocked the colony. Shards of metal whistled through the air like deadly arrows. Ethan pushed his legs harder, ignoring the pain in his chest. The girl looked up at him, confused, as if she couldn't understand why a stranger, a human, was charging toward her. "Move!" he shouted, though he knew she might not understand his words. Still, his voice carried desperation. A massive steel beam broke loose above them. Time seemed to slow. Ethan lunged forward, throwing himself over the girl just as the beam and the blast wave struck. His arms wrapped around her small body. The world vanished in a storm of fire, dust, and noise. Pain. That was the last thing he felt before the darkness took him. Silence. Ethan didn't know how long he had been unconscious. Minutes? Hours? He struggled to open his eyes, his head pounding. The smell of smoke and ash filled his lungs. Slowly, his vision cleared and he realized he was still alive. The girl was there too. She sat close to him, her tiny hands gripping his arm tightly, her wide eyes wet with tears. She was unharmed, though dust covered her hair and clothes. When she saw him move, relief washed over her face. Ethan tried to speak, but his throat was dry. He coughed, his voice a weak rasp. "You safe?" The girl nodded, though she did not speak. Instead, she pressed her forehead to his arm in gratitude. But before he could say more, Ethan noticed something else. They were not alone. Figures stood around him, tall, armored, alien soldiers. Their glowing eyes watched him closely, their hands resting on strange weapons. Their faces were unreadable, neither friendly nor hostile, but their stance carried suspicion. Ethan felt his chest tighten. He was surrounded. One of the soldiers stepped forward. His voice was deep, echoing through the ruined air. Ethan didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. A question, a demand. Why was a human lying here protecting one of their children? Ethan glanced at the girl. She clung to him tighter, refusing to let go. She looked at the soldiers, her lips trembling, but no sound came out. The soldiers exchanged quick glances. Ethan could feel the tension rising. He was a stranger, an outsider, found at the center of destruction with one of their young. It didn't matter that he had risked his life to protect her. Their eyes held doubt, maybe even anger. He tried to sit up, but pain lanced through his ribs. His vision blurred again. The world swayed around him. The last thing Ethan saw before the darkness returned was the alien girl's face. She whispered something soft in her own language, her small hand holding his tightly, and then the shadows pulled him under once more. When Ethan wakes again, he knows everything has changed. He is no longer in the ruins of the colony. He is somewhere else. Somewhere surrounded by those who do not trust him. But that moment has not yet come. For now the story leaves him lying in the ash of the deadly blast, with only a child's small hand reminding him that his sacrifice had meaning. The awakening darkness slowly gave way to light. Ethan's mind swam between dreams and reality. At first he thought he was still buried under the wreckage, that the fire and smoke were closing in on him. But when his eyes finally opened, the world around him was different. He lay on a smooth surface, softer than stone but colder than any bed he had ever known. Strange lights pulsed along the ceiling, glowing in colors his eyes struggled to name. A faint hum filled the air, steady and constant like the breathing of some vast machine. Ethan tried to sit up, but pain roared through his ribs, forcing him back down. His breath came shallow, his body reminding him of the explosion. Then he heard it, soft footsteps, quick and nervous. He turned his head and saw her. The alien girl, the same child he had shielded from the blast. She was alive, unhurt. Relief washed over him. She stood beside him, her silver eyes watching every movement he made. When their gazes met, she tilted her head slightly as though trying to understand him. "Hey," Ethan whispered, his throat dry. "You're okay." The girl didn't answer, not in words. Instead, she touched his arm with her small hand, a gesture filled with gratitude. Her fingers lingered for only a moment before she stepped back, but Ethan soon realized they were not alone. Shadows shifted in the far corners of the chamber. Tall figures emerged, alien soldiers, their armor gleaming under the strange lights. Their faces were hard, their movements disciplined. In their hands, weapons glowed faintly, humming with restrained energy. Ethan's instincts told him these were not guards here to protect him. One of them spoke, his voice deep and sharp, the alien tongue rolling like thunder. Ethan couldn't understand the words, but the intent was clear. Questions, demands, accusations. Ethan lifted his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. I saved her," he said, nodding toward the girl. "Explosion. I covered her." The soldier's eyes narrowed and he barked another command. The others tightened their grip on their weapons. The girl stepped forward quickly, her small body placing itself between Ethan and the soldiers. She shouted in her language, her voice trembling but loud. The soldiers froze. They looked at each other, murmuring in low tones. Ethan couldn't understand, but he knew the girl was defending him. He felt a strange warmth in his chest, yet the atmosphere did not soften. If anything, suspicion hung heavier. A new figure entered the chamber, a tall alien dressed not in armor but in flowing robes marked with glowing symbols. His presence silenced the soldiers immediately. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, studied Ethan with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. The robed alien approached slowly. He stopped only a few feet away, speaking in the same deep language. But this time his tone was calmer, measured like a judge weighing evidence. Ethan swallowed hard. He didn't know what to say. Words were useless here. All he had was the truth of his actions. He placed a hand over his chest and then pointed to the girl. He mimed shielding her, covering her, taking the blast. For a moment, silence filled the room. The robed alien's eyes flickered, catching the gesture. The girl nodded quickly, repeating something in her own tongue, her voice urgent. At last, the robed alien raised his hand. The soldiers lowered their weapons, though their stares remained cold. Ethan let out a shaky breath, but he knew this was far from safety. Hours passed. He couldn't tell how many. Ethan was left on the strange bed, his body aching, while the girl remained close by. Sometimes she sat quietly watching him. Sometimes she whispered words he couldn't understand, her voice soft like she was telling him stories. Ethan felt a strange bond forming. She trusted him completely, even when her own people doubted. Why? He wondered what made her so sure of him, but rest did not last long. The robed alien returned, this time with more guards. They gestured sharply, motioning for Ethan to stand. He winced as he pushed himself up, his injury screaming in protest. The girl tried to protest, her voice rising, but she was ignored. Ethan was pulled forward, out of the chamber and into long corridors filled with glowing walls and echoing footsteps. The air smelled different here, heavy with unfamiliar scents. Everywhere he looked, aliens stopped to stare. Some whispered, others frowned openly. Finally, they entered a vast chamber, high ceilings arched above, lit by pillars of light. At the far end sat a circle of alien leaders, their robes shimmering with colors that shifted like liquid. Their eyes followed Ethan as he was forced to kneel in the center. The girl rushed forward, breaking free of the guards. She stood beside him, her small hand gripping his arm once more. The leaders began to speak, their voices rising in a rhythm that felt like judgment. Ethan couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear: suspicion, accusation, debate. He looked at the girl. She looked back with fierce determination, as if she already knew what he was about to face. Ethan realized with a sinking feeling that saving her life might have only brought him into greater danger. He was no longer just a human engineer stranded on a colony. He was a man standing trial in a world that might never trust him. And yet, as the chamber filled with harsh voices, one thing became clear. He wasn't alone anymore. The girl would not leave his side. The alien council's doubt. The chamber was vast and heavy with silence. The walls shimmered faintly, alive with patterns that shifted like water as though the building itself was listening. Ethan knelt in the center of the glowing floor, surrounded on all sides by alien guards. Their weapons were lowered but ready, humming softly with restrained power. At the far end, the council sat. 7 figures in flowing robes, their faces sharp and unreadable, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Each one wore a crest across their chest, marking their rank and lineage. Their voices carried authority even when they whispered. Ethan's heart pounded. He had been in strange places before, but never like this. These were not miners or soldiers, these were leaders, judges of a whole people. One wrong word, one wrong movement could mean his death. The girl stood beside him, her small frame trembling, but her chin held high. She clung to Ethan's arm like a lifeline, refusing to let go even when guards tried to pull her away. Her silver eyes burned with defiance. She spoke quickly, her words spilling out in her native tongue, sharp and urgent. The council listened, their expressions shifting slightly. Some frowned, others raised their brows, but none spoke until the eldest among them, a woman with lines etched deep into her pale blue skin, raised her hand. The chamber fell quiet. Her voice was slow, deliberate, heavy with years of command. She spoke in their language, her eyes fixed on Ethan. He could not understand her words, but he understood her tone. Doubt, suspicion, a question repeated again and again. Why? Why would a human risk his life for one of their children? Why would an outsider throw himself into fire for someone not of his blood, not of his people? Ethan swallowed hard. His body ached, his ribs still sore, but he forced himself upright. He didn't know how to answer in words, so he answered with action. He pressed a hand to his chest, then pointed to the girl. He mimed the explosion, the fire, and then curved his arms around an invisible shape, shielding it. His message was simple. I protected her because she was a child. Because she needed me. The girl gasped softly and repeated his gestures, adding her own words. She spoke louder now, her voice carrying across the chamber. Her small body shook with emotion, but she didn't stop. Her words were like a flood, pouring out in defense of the man who had saved her. For the first time, Ethan saw cracks in the council's hard expressions. Some leaned forward, studying him more carefully. Others whispered among themselves. But the doubt did not fade completely. The eldest woman raised her hand again and silence fell once more. She asked another question, her tone sharper this time. Ethan couldn't understand, but the girl did. Her face went pale. She shook her head furiously, clutching Ethan's arm tighter, shouting a desperate, "No!" The guards shifted uneasily. The tension in the chamber grew so thick that Ethan could feel it pressing against his chest. He looked between the council members and the girl, trying to guess what had been asked. The weight of it told him it was no small matter. Then the robed alien he had seen earlier, the one with intelligent, watchful eyes, stepped forward. He bowed to the council and spoke in measured tones as though offering counsel. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it. He gestured toward Ethan, then toward the girl, and finally toward the ceiling, where faint cracks in the glowing wall still hinted at the destruction outside. Ethan realized they weren't just doubting him. They were searching for someone to blame. The explosion that tore through the colony had shaken their world. To them, perhaps it was easier to suspect the stranger than to admit weakness within their own people. The girl shouted again, her voice sharp with anger. She pointed at Ethan, her small hand trembling, then pounded it against her chest. Her meaning was clear: he is no enemy. He is my protector. The robed alien studied her, then turned his gaze to Ethan once more. Their eyes locked. In that moment, Ethan felt like the man was looking into his soul, weighing his every heartbeat. Finally, the elder woman spoke again, her voice heavy with judgment. The words rolled through the chamber, and though Ethan couldn't understand them, he knew what they meant. This was not over. He was not free. The guards stepped closer, their weapons glowing faintly once more. The girl tried to protest, her voice breaking, but she was held back gently by another robed figure. She cried out, reaching for Ethan, but the guards pulled him to his feet and began to drag him away. Ethan's chest tightened. He wasn't being executed, not yet. But he was a prisoner, a stranger trapped in a world where his every action was doubted. Still, as he was led away, he looked back at the girl. Her eyes locked on his, burning with tears and determination. She hadn't given up on him, and neither would he. The girl's secret. The cell was dim and cold. Its walls pulsed faintly with light, alive like veins under skin. Ethan sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, his ribs still aching from the explosion. The air smelled metallic and silence pressed heavy against his ears. He had lost track of time. Hours? Days? He didn't know. The only sound came from the footsteps of guards who sometimes passed outside, their shadows sliding across the glowing bars of his cell. Ethan tried to stay calm, but his thoughts raced. He remembered the council's eyes, suspicious, sharp, doubting. They didn't see him as a savior. They saw him as a danger, and maybe, just maybe, they were looking for a reason to make him disappear. But in the middle of the silence, he heard it. Soft movement. A whisper of steps that did not belong to armored guards. Then he saw her. The alien girl slipped into the corridor, small and quiet as a shadow. Her eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, silver like starlight. She looked both frightened and determined as she reached for the control panel beside his cell. Her hands moved quickly, pressing symbols Ethan didn't understand. The glowing bars faded with a low hum. The door slid open. "Hey," Ethan whispered, startled. "What are you doing here?" She didn't answer at first. Instead, she grabbed his hand, pulling him to his feet with surprising strength for someone so small. She spoke in her language, words tumbling out fast, her voice full of urgency. Ethan shook his head helplessly. "I don't understand." "Slow down." The girl paused, then placed her small hand over her chest. Her expression was serious, older than her years. She pointed toward the ceiling, then to the ground, and finally pressed her hands together as though mimicking an explosion. Ethan froze. His mind pieced it together. "The blast," he murmured. "It wasn't an accident, was it?" The girl's eyes filled with fear. She nodded quickly. Then she leaned closer, whispering something even though he couldn't understand the words. Her trembling hand pointed toward the walls of the prison, toward the city beyond. She shook her head fiercely, then mimed someone watching, someone listening. Ethan's blood ran cold. Someone had caused the explosion. Someone powerful, and if the girl knew, then she was in danger. She pressed her forehead against his hand the same way she had when he first woke up. Then she looked into his eyes as if begging him to promise. Her meaning was clear even without words. "Protect me. Don't let them take me," Ethan exhaled slowly. He was tired, injured, and far from home. But he couldn't ignore her. He hadn't saved her from the explosion just to abandon her now. "All right," he whispered. "I'll protect you. No matter what." The girl's face softened with relief. But before he could say more, voices echoed down the corridor. "Guards." Her eyes widened. She quickly shut the cell door again, pressing the panel until the bars hummed back to life. Ethan stepped back, returning to his place against the wall just as shadows appeared. 2 guards walked past, their glowing weapons casting sharp light into the cell. They glanced inside, suspicious but not alarmed. Ethan kept his expression blank, his breathing steady. When the guards moved on, the girl pressed her small finger to her lips, warning him to stay silent. Then, just as quickly as she had come, she slipped back into the shadows and was gone. Ethan sat in the cold again, his heart racing. His chest ached not from pain but from the weight of her secret. The explosion wasn't random. It was planned. And now he understood why the council doubted him so fiercely. Perhaps they weren't blind, they were scared. Scared of admitting that the real danger was among their own people. It was easier to blame an outsider, but if the girl was right, if a conspiracy was behind this, then her life was the key. She had seen or heard something she wasn't supposed to. Ethan clenched his fists. He didn't know this world. He didn't know their language, their laws, or their enemies. But he knew one thing: he had promised her. And he would not break that promise. For the first time since the blast, he felt a spark of resolve. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He had a purpose. As the night deepened and silence returned, Ethan leaned against the cold wall, whispering to himself, "They want a reason to doubt me. Fine, but they'll see. I'll prove the truth." Far away, beyond the glowing walls of his cell, whispers of conspiracy stirred. The girl had given him more than a secret. She had given him a reason to fight, and Ethan knew the storm was only just beginning. The escape. The walls of the cell glowed faintly, but Ethan's mind burned brighter with determination. The girl's secret haunted him. The explosion wasn't an accident, it was part of something bigger. And if she knew, then she was the target. He couldn't sit in this cage any longer. Hours passed before he heard it again. The soft shuffle of small feet. The girl appeared, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the dark. She moved with quiet urgency, her head darting from side to side as if afraid of being seen. She pressed her hand against the panel, and the bars faded once more with a low hum. Ethan stepped forward, wincing at the ache in his ribs, but his heart was steady. "You're sure about this?" he whispered, even though he knew she couldn't understand him. The girl nodded firmly, grabbing his hand. Her tiny fingers gripped with surprising strength, pulling him into the corridor. They ran. The halls were long and curved, glowing faintly with alien symbols. The hum of machines echoed around them. Ethan's boots pounded against the floor, but the girl was light on her feet, guiding him with sharp turns and sudden stops. She knew this place well. Twice they froze as guards passed. The girl pressed a finger to her lips, pulling Ethan into the shadows. His heart hammered as soldiers marched by, their armor gleaming, their weapons humming softly. But luck or fate kept them hidden. When the way cleared, they moved again. Soon the corridor narrowed into tunnels. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping with moisture. The glow of the walls faded, replaced by shadows. Ethan realized they were moving deeper into the underbelly of the city. The girl pointed ahead, whispering words he couldn't understand, but her meaning was clear. This way. They crawled through narrow passages, climbed over rusted platforms, and slipped through half-broken gates. Ethan's body screamed with pain at every movement, but he didn't stop. The girl's small hand guided him forward, and that was enough. At last, they reached a hidden chamber. It was old, abandoned, filled with dust and silence. Strange machines sat broken in the corners, their lights long dead. The girl let go of his hand and hurried to one of the walls. She pressed a panel, and with a groan, a metal plate slid aside, revealing a small opening. A tunnel. Ethan stepped closer, frowning. "You've been here before, haven't you?" The girl looked at him, her expression solemn, and nodded. Before they could move, a noise echoed behind them. Heavy footsteps. The sound of weapons charging. The guards had found them. The girl's eyes widened in fear. Ethan's heart jumped, but instinct took over. He shoved her toward the tunnel. "Go!" She hesitated, shaking her head, refusing to leave him. "Go!" Ethan shouted again, his voice fierce. He grabbed a piece of broken metal pipe from the floor, gripping it like a weapon. The guards burst into the chamber, their armor glowing in the dim light. Their eyes locked on Ethan, then the girl. Shouts filled the air. Ethan didn't wait. He swung the pipe hard, striking the nearest guard across the chest. The alien staggered back, surprised by the human's sudden ferocity, but more followed, their weapons raised. Energy bolts crackled through the air, smashing into the walls with bursts of light. Ethan ducked, rolling to the side, then hurled the pipe at another soldier. It clanged against his helmet, buying precious seconds. The girl screamed, her voice high and desperate, then grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him toward the tunnel. Together they crawled inside, the space barely wide enough to move through. Energy blasts exploded behind them, shaking the metal. Sparks rained down, burning Ethan's back. They crawled faster, the tunnel twisting like a snake. Sweat dripped into Ethan's eyes, his muscles burning, but he kept going. The girl moved ahead, guiding him with quick turns. At last, they spilled out into open air. Ethan gasped, sucking in cool night wind. The sky above was alive with stars, endless and cold. They had escaped the heart of the alien city. Below, glowing towers stretched far, connected by bridges of light. The world looked both beautiful and terrifying, but they weren't safe yet. Shouts echoed behind them. The guards were still chasing. The girl grabbed his hand again and pulled him across a narrow walkway high above the city. Ethan's stomach twisted at the sight of the endless drop below, but he forced himself to keep moving. Halfway across, another group of soldiers appeared on the other side. Trapped. The girl froze, panic flashing in her eyes. Ethan scanned quickly, his breath sharp in his chest. Then he saw it, another tunnel entrance half hidden beneath the bridge. "Jump!" he barked, pointing. The girl shook her head in fear. Ethan crouched down, meeting her eyes. "Trust me." He didn't know if she understood the words, but she seemed to understand his tone. Slowly she nodded. Together they leapt. They landed hard inside the dark tunnel, rolling across the metal floor. Shouts roared above them, but the guards could not follow so easily. Breathless, bruised, and aching, Ethan looked at the girl. She looked back at him, her face pale but alive. For the first time, she gave him a small smile. They had escaped for now, but deep in Ethan's heart he knew this was only the beginning. The girl's secret was bigger than either of them, and the shadows chasing them would not stop until both of them were silenced. The bigger conspiracy. The tunnel stretched on for what felt like miles, dark, damp, and filled with the smell of rust. It forced Ethan and the girl to move slowly, their footsteps echoing faintly against the metal walls. Every sound seemed too loud, too dangerous, as though enemies could hear them even here. At last they reached a chamber deep beneath the city. Broken machines lay scattered across the floor, their lights long dead. The air was still, heavy with dust, but it gave them a moment to breathe. Ethan leaned against the wall, his ribs burning with pain. The girl sat close, hugging her knees. For a while they said nothing. Only the sound of Ethan's labored breathing filled the space. Then the girl stood. She walked to a small panel on the wall and pressed her hand against it. To Ethan's surprise, a hidden compartment slid open with a faint hiss. Inside were scraps of paper like sheets and small crystal devices that glowed faintly in the dark. She picked one up and held it out to him. Ethan frowned, taking it carefully. When he touched it, the crystal flickered and displayed a projection in the air. Images, moving symbols, strange maps. Ethan couldn't read them, but one thing was clear. The explosion was part of a pattern. He saw diagrams of colonies, supply routes, and weapon caches. He saw highlighted points across star systems glowing like targets, and at the center of it all, children. Images of alien children, their names listed, their faces marked. Ethan's stomach twisted. "They're using kids?" he whispered. The girl nodded, her face pale. Her voice came out in a trembling whisper, words in her own tongue. Though Ethan didn't understand the language, her fear was clear. She pressed her hand against her chest, then pointed to herself. "You're one of them," Ethan realized. "You're a target." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. Pieces fell into place in Ethan's mind. The explosion wasn't meant to destroy the colony. It was meant to create fear, to start a war. And the girl, perhaps others like her, were in the center of it. Whoever was behind this conspiracy didn't care about peace. They wanted chaos. The projection shifted again, showing a symbol, dark, sharp like a jagged star. The girl pointed at it, her hand shaking. She spoke the word slowly, as if she wanted him to remember. "Forkan." Ethan repeated it under his breath. "Forkan." Whoever they were powerful enough to plan something that stretched across worlds. Suddenly, noise echoed in the distance, metal clanging, voices shouting. The guards were close. The girl quickly shut the panel, hiding the evidence. Ethan grabbed her hand. "We can't stay here." They rushed down another corridor, their footsteps echoing like thunder in the silence. The tunnel twisted sharply, then opened into a massive chamber. Ethan stopped short. Before them stretched a hidden hangar filled with strange ships, half-built or half-hidden. Workers moved like shadows, carrying weapons and crates. The air buzzed with energy, the smell of fuel sharp in the air. The girl tugged at his sleeve, pointing. In the far corner, a group of armored figures stood together, their voices low but urgent. Ethan squinted, his heart pounding. He recognized one of them, the robed alien who had spoken for the council earlier. His blood ran cold. The man who had appeared wise and calm was here, among the conspirators. Ethan pulled the girl back into the shadows before they were seen. His mind raced. This was proof. The conspiracy reached higher than he had imagined. Leaders, perhaps even council members, were part of it. The girl clutched his arm, whispering softly. Her voice trembled, but her eyes burned with determination. She wasn't just scared anymore, she was angry. Ethan crouched beside her, whispering back even though he knew she wouldn't understand. "We need to expose this. If the others knew, they wouldn't blame me. They'd fight the real enemy." She tilted her head, studying his face, then nodded. But before they could move, a sharp light cut across the shadows. "Human." A soldier shouted. Ethan cursed under his breath. They had been spotted. The hangar exploded into chaos. Shouts rose, weapons crackled, and footsteps thundered. Ethan grabbed the girl's hand, pulling her toward the nearest exit. Energy blasts slammed into the walls around them, spraying sparks. The girl cried out as one bolt struck close, heat searing her cheek. Ethan shielded her with his body as they ran, weaving through crates and machinery. His heart pounded in his chest, every step a battle. He had no weapon, no plan, only the will to keep her alive. They stumbled into another tunnel, the sound of pursuit echoing behind them. The girl gasped for air, her small body trembling, but she didn't let go of his hand. At last, they found a narrow hatch. Ethan shoved it open, and together they slipped inside, the door slamming shut behind them. Silence fell. They were safe. For now. The girl pressed her forehead against Ethan's arm, her breath shaky. Ethan leaned against the wall, his own chest heaving. His mind replayed what he had seen, the weapons, the ships, the symbol of the Vorkon, and the councilman among them. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was war. And Ethan realized something else. He and the girl were the only ones who knew the truth. If they failed, countless lives would be lost. The final stand. The hatch door rattled under the force of pounding fists. The conspirators' soldiers were closing in, their shouts echoing through the tunnels. Ethan's chest heaved as he looked at the girl beside him. Her silver eyes glistened with both fear and fire. She clung to his arm, refusing to let go. "We can't run forever," Ethan muttered under his breath. He pressed his back to the wall, forcing himself to think. "If we just keep escaping, they'll hunt us until we're caught. We need to stop them here." The girl tilted her head, not understanding his words, but she seemed to sense his resolve. Slowly she nodded, placing her small hand against his chest as if to say, "I'll stand with you." Ethan's heart tightened. She had trusted him from the beginning. He couldn't fail her now. The pounding grew louder. The hatch door began to glow under the heat of cutting tools. They had only minutes before the soldiers broke through. Ethan scanned the chamber they were in. Old generators sat along the walls, their surfaces dusty but not dead. He moved quickly, checking the controls. A hum responded to his touch. These machines still had power. He turned to the girl. "We're not running anymore. We're fighting." She looked confused, but when he mimed an explosion and pointed at the hatch, her eyes widened with understanding. Slowly, she smiled, nodding firmly. Working together, they rigged the generators. Ethan connected wires, sparks flying as he forced them into place. The girl helped, bringing tools from dusty shelves, her small hands steady despite the danger. The hatch glowed brighter. Metal groaned. Voices shouted on the other side. Finally, Ethan finished. He pulled the girl close, shielding her with his body. "Stay down!" The hatch burst open. Soldiers stormed in, weapons raised, armor gleaming. Ethan slammed his hand onto the control panel. The generators roared to life, releasing a blinding surge of energy. Light exploded through the chamber, followed by a shockwave that hurled the soldiers backward. Some slammed into walls, their weapons clattering to the ground. The girl covered her ears, her face pressed against Ethan's chest. He held her tightly, enduring the blast as best as he could. When the light faded, the chamber was filled with smoke. Soldiers lay scattered, groaning, but more footsteps echoed in the tunnels beyond. Reinforcements. And then Ethan saw him, the robed councilman stepping through the smoke. His sharp eyes glowed with rage, no longer hiding his true allegiance. "You," Ethan whispered. The councilman spoke in his language, voice sharp like a blade. He pointed at the girl, then at Ethan. His meaning was clear: give her up. Or die. The girl clutched Ethan's arm tighter, shaking her head furiously. She spoke back, her small voice breaking but filled with courage. Ethan didn't understand the words, but her defiance burned bright. The councilman's face twisted with fury. He raised his hand, energy crackling. Ethan didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbing a fallen weapon from the ground. The alien gun hummed strangely in his grip, but when he squeezed the trigger, a bolt of light shot out, striking the wall near the councilman. Sparks rained down. The soldiers charged again. The chamber filled with chaos, blasts of light, shouts of war, the clash of steel. Ethan fought with everything he had, blocking, striking, firing wildly. His body screamed in pain, but he refused to fall. The girl stayed close, shouting warnings, pulling him back when danger neared. She wasn't just a child anymore, she was his partner in survival. Finally, with a roar, Ethan tackled the councilman to the ground. They struggled fiercely, the alien strength overwhelming. But Ethan fought with desperation, thinking only of the girl, of the promise he had made. He slammed the butt of the weapon into the councilman's chest, then wrenched it free. The councilman gasped, his voice breaking into a final curse before he collapsed. Defeated. Silence followed. The remaining soldiers froze, their leader gone. The girl stepped forward, her small figure trembling but unbroken. She raised her voice, shouting words in her language that echoed through the chamber. Her tone carried authority far beyond her years. The soldiers lowered their weapons. One by one, they knelt. Ethan stood, bruised and bloodied, staring in disbelief. The girl turned to him, her silver eyes shining with tears. She placed her small hand against his chest once more, whispering softly. Though he couldn't understand the words, he felt the meaning. You saved me. You saved us. Hours later, the true council, the ones not tied to the conspiracy, learned of what had happened. The Vorkan plot was exposed, their ships destroyed, their allies revealed. The girl stood before them, her voice steady as she told the truth. And when she spoke of Ethan, she called him not an enemy but a hero. For the first time, the eyes that had once doubted him now held respect. Ethan didn't care about honor or titles. He cared about the girl beside him, alive and safe. He had kept his promise. As the alien city began to rebuild, one thing became clear. This was not the end of Ethan's story. It was only the beginning, because somewhere out there the Vorkan still waited. And when they returned, he would be ready.